It says we're live.
Okay, everyone, this is John Haller. Apologize for the mix-up. There's another YouTube video. I don't think that one's working, so I don't know how people would go to that one and direct them here, but I apologize for it. This thing double posted this time, which is kind of unusual. So anyway, welcome to a special update today. I have some friends with me. I have Steve, the tour guide. You're going to get to know here in a moment, and Mark Sutherland from the Sutherland Report, and J. Micah Hancock, you want me to call you that, or what do you want me to call you?
That's usually the name I use when I'm on the.
Okay, in the real world, in your public persona, that's okay.
Yeah.
So J. Micah Hancock from All Israel News. Today we're going to talk a little bit about rising anti-Semitism on the right, and the reason I brought Steve, the tour guide, in is because Steve has done a number of videos recently. I think starting with a prophecy update that you did back, I think in August, maybe with Brett Medor at Athey Creek Church in Oregon. And is that a Calvary Chapel church, by the way?
His origins are with Calvary Chapel. His brother-in-law is actually one of the big, I would call one of the former big three of that movement, a guy by the name of John Corson.
Okay, sure.
But since then he went independent, Brett. So I call him a Calvary-like chapel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Calvary-like, not Calvary-light, because Brett's a pretty big guy, right?
Yeah.
Like
although to his credit, he's lost
losing,
over 160 pounds.
He's lost quite a bit of weight.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
He
lost to Steve, the tour guide, basically. He lost the equivalent of what I weigh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's an interesting thing. So anyway, you did a prophecy update with him a few months ago, in which you talked about growing anti-Semitism on the right. You've also done a couple recent videos. I think one was on the Groypers. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And also on the new, I think you called it the new Gnosticism.
Yes, the new Gnosticism.
And by the way, I have listened to all of those, and I think there must be something wrong, because I think I agree with you on virtually everything. So let's talk about, Steve, first tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the meat of what we want to talk about today.
Sure. So in short, I'm born in the United States, got saved as a freshman at Penn State, moved to Israel the year after I graduated Penn State back in 1995. Lived on a kibbutz for my first 6 months, after which I went directly to the Israeli army, where I served in an infantry brigade called Golani. Did just short of 2 years in that, because it's based on your age at the time that you're drafted, how much time you'll spend in the army. Can't claim that I saw much action. You know, I don't have any exciting war stories. I served in probably the most peaceful time in Israel's history. Was during the Trojan horse peace process called Oslo. And although Oslo, of course, turned out to be an awful thing, in the midst of it for a time, even a false peace process still had quiet dividends, at least for the time that I was in the army. So trained mostly to fight Hezbollah in Lebanon. That was the focus of Golani, and of course that finally happened long after I served in this latest war of the last couple of years, you know, in which Hezbollah featured at the center. So served just less than 2 years in the army, after which I did annual reserve duty until the age of 40. And then Jamie knows me because the two of us studied together at Hebrew University while I was doing my master's, and Jamie was doing his master's. Then I went on to do a PhD, and my PhD is related. The general field is comparative literature, the ancient Greeks, Romans, and Jews of a particular era, comparing how each one's literature and culture rubbed off on the other. And, you know, how does that bear evidence in each person's literature? My dissertation was related to Josephus, and I studied under one of the world's leading Josephus scholars.
Yeah.
And I've been a tour guide, a licensed tour guide, hence Steve the tour guide is my name, since the year 2000.
Okay. So one of the things that, just a sidebar of personal interest, I was a trial lawyer. I retired a few years ago. Still have my license, so I've been licensed for about 45 years. But in 1993, I had some depositions in Washington, D.C. Just so happened that they were on September 13th, 1993, when they were signing the Oslo Accords. I stayed over the one evening because I got done late. You know, you can't leave Reagan Airport. Wasn't Reagan Airport at the time, but you can't leave that airport after there's a curfew. And so the next day I went down to one of my best friends from high school who had just been elected as a Democratic congressman from Arizona. He's Jewish, and he was all excited about having been at the White House the day before because of Oslo. And I remember telling him, I don't really think this is going to work out very well. So I think I stand by that here 32 years later. So, Steve, you've done some great videos. I will put links to the videos that he's done recently, at least 3 of them, on the rise of anti-Semitism on the right. I don't know how else to. I don't really like the term anti-Semitism. I really prefer the term Jew hatred. And Jay Micah and Mark and I were at the Christian Media Summit, and one of the big subjects at the Christian Media Summit was rising anti-Semitism in the world. I'm sure I'm like all of the guys here. My X feed is a sewer of Jew hatred every day. It's unbelievable. And as bad as the posts are, the comments are even worse. So,
Ain't that the
Steve,
truth? Yeah.
why don't you kind of tell us where we are and why you think we got here? And then we'll dig into some of the finer details on Candace, the big 3 right now, Candace, Tucker, and Nick Fuentes.
So first I'll mention what the orthodoxy claims about the Groypers, and then I'll tweak it a little because I don't think the media does complete justice to the orthodoxy. Or the orthodoxy says that these are disaffected white young men who over the last 10 or 15 years have been made to feel by both the education system, the pop culture, that the original sin is being a white Christian male. And therefore, they've had enough of this, and they're a reaction to all that. And there is some truth to that. What I feel has not been addressed by the secular media, they only care that Nick Fuentes is racist, or white nationalist, because these are subjects that they've always cared about themselves. What they don't touch upon is that there's a very distinct stream of Catholic reactionaryism to all this. Nick, throughout his videos, claims to be a very devout Catholic. His passion is for Catholicism pre-Vatican II, and that's crucial because Vatican II was issued largely to redefine the Catholic Church's relationship with the Jewish people. Usually those that reject Vatican II, it's because of that. Now, some of it is because they also resent that, for instance, the Latin liturgy was replaced by, say, the popular Koine liturgies of each modern day country today, like in, English in the U.S. and Spanish in Spanish-speaking countries instead of Latin. And I'm sure there's something to that too. I'm sure there's a whole menu of gripes that they have with the post-Vatican II Catholic Church. But the main one that seems to really animate them is this whole Jewish thing, the perfidious Jews. So there's a Catholic dimension to all this. And of course, I'm not insinuating that mainstream Catholics all share this view. Of course not. But this is a reactionary form of Catholicism it's now a symbiosis of sorts between white nationalism and this Catholic reaction. Or reactionaryism. I'm not sure I'm phrasing that. I doubt the word reactionaryism exists, but you know what I'm trying to say, even if I'm making up the word on the fly here. So I think that's very important. And it's another thing I think that's a myth. I don't think these people are only right-wingers to the extent that they prioritize race and ethnicity, but they're really not conservatives because The goal of Nick Fuentes is to overthrow the American system and replace it with a theocracy based on this version that I just mentioned, this pre-Vatican II type of more radical Catholicism, which is intolerant to Protestants as well as Jews. Now I haven't heard him go out on a limb and say he wants to put people to death from Protestant backgrounds like he has said about Jews, but as you know, the famous expression, first they came for the Jews, then they came for everybody else. So I think that's an important tweak of the orthodoxy to mention this whole Catholic element to it. So that's how it's usually presented, is, this white nationalistic anti-Semitism, but he's definitely not a conservative. And this cuts to the battle going on in conservative circles in America, because you have people and like Megyn Kelly say, who does consider these people to her right to be conservatives, and therefore they should be brought under the umbrella of conservatism, whether, we disagree with these people or not. And then you have people like me say, these aren't conservatives at all. They want to overthrow the system no less than Mamdani wants to overthrow the system. But Mamdani wants to overthrow it from the leftist Marxism side of the equation. Whereas, Fuentes and these people want to overthrow it from the right, but they can sort of meet and build a bridge together. And I think, John, you sent me a link about that. You were interested in that subject, how the Groypers have reached out to the progressive left, because they do have common ground. Their common ground is that they want to tear down our current system. That's what they have in common.
Yeah, I think the link I sent you was a video I just saw of Nick Fuentes today, I believe, saying that it's time that we sort of abandon this MAGA thing and join with the progressive left to take down America. So that it seems to me to be the living embodiment of the horseshoe theory.
Yes.
That it's not a line of a continuum from extreme left on the left to right on the right, but it's a horseshoe. And where the horseshoe meets is the extremist overlap, I think is the. That's and right. I think we're sort of, everything we see today sort of validates that. Anyway, I interrupted you. Go ahead, continue.
Oh, well, I just wanted to mention there's also the very important Charlie Kirk factor in all this, because Charlie was uniquely anointed and had a calling on his life. Charlie, I liken to the proverbial dam that the kid sticks his finger in the dike, causes the fissure, and then become a tsunami. Charlie Kirk, while he was alive, said that over 50% of the questions he fielded on his college outings were Israel-related, by these Groypers. In fact, Nick Fuentes calls these moments the Groyper Wars. He would encourage his followers to crash Charlie Kirk's, college outings and to overwhelm him with questions. And just Charlie had a unique ability. He had this long suffering and patience and grace. And of course, Charlie was a true believer, born again. He was immersed in the word, and he knew how to handle these people. In Charlie's absence, none of the people filling in for him at these turning point events have that same anointing. First of all, I'm not sure that they're genuinely believers, okay? And even if they are, none of them really have been immersed in the word to the extent that Charlie has. They haven't done the research of the pertinent biblical, verses and passages and books of the Bible that deal with the Israel issue. So they're like a deer in the headlights when they're confronted with these Groypers. So Charlie's death, unfortunately, allowed what he was able to hold back with his unique skills and calling on his life. Now it's erupted since he died. I think the last thing I just want to say, John, because I agree with you, I spend a lot of time on Twitter, and it's so unhealthy for the soul. I always feel so dirty after I'm on Twitter. I spend sometimes a couple hours on it a day to follow these people. What we don't see on Twitter is just as important, and I'm not sure we can quantify it in any way, which is since Charlie's murder, there is said to be a pretty serious revival going on among, these what do you call them? Gen Zers, in other words, the same people that are drawn to Nick Fuentes, many of them of that same generation were moved by Charlie's murder. we have to remember that Charlie's memorial service was seen by 100 million people. And supposedly, and I've only seen follow-ups on this story on sites like Fox News, but supposedly there's been a huge spike in interest in the Bible and Bible reading by that same generation. And yet they don't necessarily tweet. Those people don't necessarily show up on Twitter. So there is this silent, unfortunately, this behind the scenes thing that has potential to play out as well on all this Groyper stuff as a counter force, which is a revival supposedly happening since, Charlie's murder. I just don't know how large a group of people we're talking about that have been turning to the Bible. And I don't know if they're turning to the Bible unhindered. Are they getting it, or have they turned to the Bible, but are they looking to Tucker Carlson, and the Groypers to interpret the Bible for them? Or are they doing what I did, which is in college when I got saved? I fell in love with the Bible, and I'd spend hours a day reading it in my privacy in my room, not intermediated by anybody on social media or even the religious world, pastors or any of that. So what is the quality of this revival and interest in the Bible that's taken place since Charlie's murder is all interesting factors that we have to factor in, but we can't quantify it as easily as we can the Groyper phenomenon.
Yeah.
And Mike and Mark, feel free to chime in. I did hear a couple things I've heard from Nick. Let's focus on Nick Fuentes first. And maybe you can explain what a Groyper is in answering this too, but because some people might not be exactly aware of that. But I heard Fuentes just today. I really wish he wouldn't show up in my feed all the time on X. And what he said was just so vile. He did say that he's a Catholic. He did say, I think he's 25, I'm a virgin, which then led to a bunch of people in the comments making allegations about his sexual orientation. But then he was talking about, we just need to, I don't know how to say this in a nice way, so I don't want to offend anybody. Women just want to get the crap beat out of them by a good guy like me. And so tell us what a Groyper is, and then comment on some of the things that he's been saying here recently, which are just incredibly vile.
Steve,
ahead,
can
Steve.
you define what a Groyper is?
You want me to define what a Groyper is?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay.
What it.
Well, first of all, you're interacting with them on social media because they all have as their avatar or profile picture a character called Pepe the Frog.
Oh, that's it.
Right. So it's this cartoonish looking frog. Anybody can just Google Pepe the Frog and they'll see that that's their universal avatar. That's what they've all selected to out themselves on social media to let you know that's who they're dealing with. So a Groyper is basically a follower of Nick Fuentes, with all that entails per my previous my previous explanation. So he's their leader. They're his followers, and you're interacting with them or seeing one of their comments by the Pepe the Frog symbol that they all use as their avatars.
Or they just put Groyper in the name,
right.
The username.
Right. Okay. So they are then following someone who.
But actually, the whole thing with the Pepe the Frog is interesting because the guy who created the frog has nothing to do with the Groyper movement.
Where does the term? Where does
even
that word...
the Groyper name comes from like another variation of the frog that somebody else created. But yeah, it's interesting. I saw a post the other day on X on Twitter that was there's some little dispute going on, and like to kind of get the character of this Groyper movement, somebody had said something that was not exactly in line with Nick Fuentes, and somebody posted, "We have a leader, get in line."
Wow.
And it was like,
Wow.
oh, okay. So he really is like, he's this cult-like leader. And
So
what
does so Jay? What does that Steve? Jay, Steve,
interesting. I don't want to jump the gun, but I see the same.
I can't tell you what the actual word groiper means. It's funny.
Yeah.
You would think that I would have researched the philology of it, you know. And
I tried.
Yeah. Now it is important to say that he has over 5 million followers.
Yes.
You know, we want to definitely show that he's not some marginal figure. He's up there with the most popular people on social media.
Yeah.
Mark, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, well, first of all, Steve and Jay, thank you for looking at Twitter. I completely understand to some extent what John is saying. But the thought is this, Jay, you've just said, when you've given that example, like fall into line, and I've gone, well, what does that remind you of? What particular past figure in history does that remind you of that involve exterminating 6 million plus Jews plus others during an event called the Second World War? And the fact that today, because John shared it with me, I think a Joel Richardson tweet where Fuentes turns around and says, basically, we've just got to persuade the right to get rid of free market capitalism, right? So then he is behaving to me like a national socialist. And this is the man, please tell me if I'm wrong. I don't want to put any words in your mouth, particularly in regard to this. But this is the man that he is then constantly having a go saying, it's the Jews, and all of this. So we can see where this is, in fact, leading, and is, as we would accept, we are in the biggest spiritual battle of our lifetime, and we can see where, sadly, people. I'm quite shocked in many ways, but not in people where people are then being led, and John and I have actually discussed this, to be honest, where these three are now really telling us what they really believed.
Yes.
Right. And please, Jay, Steve, John, tell me, you know, they're suddenly revealing who they are. Are you telling me? I know Candace has recently, you know, she's married to a gentleman called Farmer. His background, what he is then involved with is rather interesting in regard to the media within the UK. And then we look at GB News and where things are being repositioned, which I find interesting because they've now got GB US, GB News. Just quickly, there's a hedge fund manager, hedge funder called Marshall involved in that, owns a considerable stake in GB News. Then as they're bought up Unheard, then they bid for the Telegraph, which they haven't got, I don't think. They then also own the Spectator UK. So it's this whole thing of where the influences are going, which is what I'm concerned about, being a bit of a, you know, the media and looking at all of that. But quickly, just going back to this, we're now bordering on, if not, he's already said it, we have then got someone who is coming out with Hitlerite comments and bestowing the delights of this man to me, you know, just sounding like a very junior Hitler at this point. Please tell me if I'm overreacting.
Go ahead,
Well,
Steve.
I was going to say of the trio that were mentioned earlier, you know, Candace, Fuentes, Tucker. Look, Candace, we can already eliminate as a serious person, even though she has 5 million followers, because she comes off as a lunatic. And
yes.
Now I'm going to say something that's cruel, probably sounding, and I don't care. Most of her listeners are probably people like her. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these people one time followed the QAnon, you know, conspiracy. I have to say I saw this stuff coming basically with the advent of QAnon. I remember being really somewhat frightened by QAnon because I couldn't believe how many evangelicals seemed so vulnerable to it. Anything with the, you know, prophetic, they just seem to some of them, or a lot of them, seem to so easily go after. It was obvious from the get-go that this is a false prophecy, you know, that this is a total counterfeit, and yet there are people that were totally sold out to it. And even though QAnon no longer makes, you know, the headlines, well, we have to ask ourselves what happened to the QAnon followers. You know, there were millions of them.
Yeah.
Where did they all herd to? Where did they all channel to? In my opinion, like the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, by the way, who Marjorie Taylor Greene was an outspoken supporter of QAnon.
Going on, yes.
So I think all of them are gravitating towards Candace Owens, and most normal people will already dismiss that as lunacy. So that I'm not saying that Candace isn't dangerous to the extent that one of her followers could do something dangerous. There was some kid from Texas who got arrested because he threatened to kill a guy named Seth Dillon. You know, I think Seth Dillon is one of the Babylon Bee guys. And when they went into the social media background of the prospective killer, Candace was one of 4 people that he subscribed to. So that's what I mean when I say, all right, I can see where Candace could be dangerous only insofar as, you know, the lunacy of her followers. But I consider Tucker to actually be the most dangerous of all.
Yeah.
Because Tucker comes off as a very rational, intelligent, serious thinker. And he's sanitizing Nick Fuentes, you know, and that's what Tucker's been accused of correctly, is trying to mainstream Nick Fuentes and make him more palatable. So I don't know if that answers your question, Mark, but I mean, yes, I consider Tucker to be a real threat. But again, look, for those of us who read the Bible, you know, at the end of the day, I can only blame. We live in days of great deception.
Yes.
And this is so scary because this is so reminiscent of what Jesus spoke about in Matthew 24. Towards the end, there'll be such great deception that even the elect, you know, to the extent that it's possible, will be persuaded by it. And you see, we're living today in pre-tribulation times, and you already see a ton of elect people being carried away by this delusion. But you see, those of us who really do invest in the Bible, reading it each day, reading it from cover to cover, we're not going to be pulled into Tucker Carlson. So at the same time, even though I think people like Tucker are dangerous, it's not like I feel he's a threat to those of us who are serious students of the word. It's the people, unfortunately, who aren't doing their part to go to the word every day, to study it, to be immersed in it, as Charlie Kirk was, and therefore had the ability to deal with this phenomenon. Whether it's due to laziness or just not having time, you have millions of professing Christians who will pay lip service to the Bible, but they're not really reading it. Now this gets a little bit into what John asked me about, not the video I did called Tucker Carlson and the New Gnosticism, because this is important. You see among a lot of these traditional Christian types that Tucker himself is. By the way, Tucker is an Episcopalian. That's the movement. So that's the Church of England's American branch. And you see this this thread through all these people, which is it's Jesus only, it's the New Testament only, and nothing to do with the Old Testament, and by default, the Old Testament deity Yahweh. And that's crucial. And this is what I meant by the New Gnosticism. I'm not claiming that Tucker Carlson and traditional Christians follow systematic Gnostic theology. Okay, the Gnostics believed, but part of Gnosticism, and I'll just get into that for a second if I can to explain it. Gnosticism believed in a supreme being. I think his name is Monad, and he's the supreme being. And between him and those of us who are imprisoned in our bodies, those of us who are souls imprisoned in the bodies, are these intermediate and descending and important supernatural beings, of which Yahweh, the God of Israel, is one of those beings. But Yahweh is one of the lowest of those intermediate beings. He's vilified. He's likened sometimes to Satan by Gnostics. He's referred to by a classical Greek word, demiurgos, which is usually rendered demiurge in English. And according to these Gnostics, Yahweh, this wicked demiurge, which translates to, it means a skilled craftsman. You know, it could be somebody who's sitting there at the potter's wheel making a clay bowl, or a leather worker, or a blacksmith. That's what Yahweh is. But he's not just a decent leathersmith or a decent potter. He's an evil potter. And as souls were imprisoned in this substance, you know, that he created. He's the creator of this a material world which is evil. And Jesus is another intermediate being who's come, and this is where it's crucial. Jesus is entirely separate and apart from Yahweh. In other words, he's distinguished from Yahweh, and that's what I call the oldest Christian heresy. Whereas Tucker claims that Christian Zionism is the oldest Christian heresy, I say no, it's actually Tucker's belief, which is that the God of the New Testament is entirely and altogether separate from the God of the Old Testament. They may pay lip service to the God of the Old Testament, but in a recent episode that Tucker did, he really snickered at Deuteronomy. He treated it very irreverently, particularly a chapter called Deuteronomy chapter 25, which commanded the ancient Israelites to exterminate the Amalekites. He used that sort of as an example to diss all of, Jews, Judaism, and by association, the Jewish God, even though he didn't come out and say that. See, and as believers, we have to believe that Jesus and that deity, even this God associated with Deuteronomy chapter 25, is one and the same. It's when you separate Jesus from that deity that you've now entered the realm of Gnosticism, treating Jesus as a separate God. And that is a trend that I'm seeing among these people. In other words, it's Jesus only and the New Testament only. And the Old Testament is only worth anything to the extent that it has Christological significance that can prove Jesus's, origins from eternity past. In other words, they'll use it for Christological purposes, but that's it. Anything else, it's absolutely worthless, the Old Testament, and in some ways embarrassing to them, as Deuteronomy chapter 25. And that's the ultimate replacement. That is the ultimate replacement of replacement theology. It's not just replacing, from that all other subsidiary replacements flow. That the church has replaced Israel stems from really the larger replacement theology that the New Testament's replaced the Old Testament, that they're no longer really one Bible. They may be in the same volume, the same bound book, but they're really to be treated separately, the one being far superior to the other, the New Testament being superior to the Old Testament. So I think that's also an important element in all of this.
That's Marcionism, though, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So Marcion, a 2nd century church father, embraced Gnosticism. And what he did was he basically eliminated the whole of the Old Testament from his Bible. He eliminated all the Gospels, what we call the Synoptic Gospels, that depict Jesus as a practitioner of Jewish law or Judaism or following Yahweh, the God of the Bible. All that remains in the Gnostic Bible of Marcion is parts of the Gospel of John and some of Paul's letters, not even all of Paul's letters.
Right.
He sort of did with he's sort of a precursor. The American founding father, Thomas Jefferson, didn't believe in the supernatural. He didn't believe in the miracles or any of that stuff. He certainly didn't believe in Lazarus, being resurrected from the dead. So what does he do? He basically edits his version of the New Testament down to just Jesus's wisdom, Jesus's wisdom teaching, probably the Beatitudes, but that's it. Anything that would depict Jesus as a supernatural, a miracle maker, a resurrector of the dead like Lazarus has to be excised from Thomas Jefferson's New Testament. That's sort of what Marcion did with Yahweh and Judaism and anything and everything Jewish, but he was declared a heretic for doing so. But what I've argued over the years is that even though Marcion was declared a heretic, his theology trickled into the church. In other words, it trickled into the church, and it survives to this day as what I call replacement theology.
Yeah, I wish I could.
Steve, that I was just reminded of when people go, it's all about love. It's all about love, right. Which is another, let's get rid of the Old Testament again. That's a sort of a modern day expression of what you've wonderfully explained. Is that fair enough?
Yeah. Well, I likened it in my last video about it. Here in the United States, there's a chain of stores called Build-A-Bear Workshop that you take your kid or grandkid to, and you can build a teddy bear to your specs and to your preferences. There's a farmer bear, a fireman bear, a Philadelphia Eagles or New York Giants bear. But you can't do that with God. God does not give us that luxury to conform him into our image. It's when you start to do that that you wander into the heresy of Gnosticism or Gnosticism. Like, well, we love Jesus and the suffer the children that come on to me, God, but we don't like the vindictive, vengeance God of Deuteronomy 25 or Zechariah chapters 12 or 14. 14 being Jesus coming back as a vengeful God, and but we don't have that leeway to do that.
Yeah. What I find so interesting about all of this is that, especially in the modern, world that we've seen, the post-Enlightenment world, the expressions of that Gnosticism, while they would want to claim that they're rejecting this Deuteronomy 25 portrayal of God or conception of God, is that most of them, if they get any political control, they rapidly turn into the sort of thing that they claim to despise. They turn into this vengeful, vindictive, political entity that uses supreme force. I mean, we see that with Hitler. We see that with I would argue that communism is often thought of as this atheist thing, but it also comes from a replacement theology type of idea.
It's a religion. It's a religion itself, isn't it, Joe?
Yes, it is. Yeah. And so anytime you replace the God of the Bible, who, yes, has elements that bother us, which might say more about us than him, but anytime you replace him with anything else, you end up by default, you have to fulfill some perverted version of God, what God is or what divine authority is. You have to. There's no other option. And that's what we see. And you see that even now with people like Nick Fuentes, is that, okay, now they are already starting to advocate, for violence against people they don't like, the very kind of violence that they would point to in the Bible as saying, oh, this is bad, look how bad this God is. They're starting to advocate that themselves.
Well, now you raise that important point. Let's just talk about, in context, what's just happened in New York, where there is a protest outside a synagogue and idiots calling for globalize the Intifada, and outside the synagogue there. In context, we know, they've just voted for Mandani. So would the comments that Fuentes is coming out with, is that the kind of behavior he would then agree with?
Did you want to say something, Jamie?
You go ahead first.
It's interesting. Nick Fuentes is a very articulate, forceful speaker, but he is also sort of a beta male. I mean, now without getting, I know we want to keep this family friendly, which I definitely will, but this is important. This is part of who Nick Fuentes is. In the nicest, politest way I can say this, he got caught live streaming something that was in the realm of gay porn.
Yeah.
And that's, we have to include this, as part of his personality portrait. If we were CIA people, that's what we would do. We would have to consider every single thing. So he's sort of this beta male who sort of fantasizes or becomes this alpha male when he talks, but I don't think he himself would ever want to do anything violent. In other words, he doesn't mind if others would do it on the behalf of the cause, like these people you're referring to in New York. I doubt you'll ever see Nick Fuentes, in a mob where violence has any chance of happening. That's what most beta males do. They sort of hide behind the alpha males to do their dirty work.
Yeah. But I would argue
yes,
that Hitler was in many ways the same.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely, Jamie.
Well said, Jay.
The SS and these other groups, they're carrying out the fantasies of this beta male.
You're 100%
correct. The danger of Nick Fuentes is that there are people following his ideas that are not as beta as he is.
The parallel is apt. It's right on the money, because there were a lot of rumors about Hitler's own sexuality and his issues.
Yep.
So absolutely, I agree 100% with what you just said. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I do see also the issue with Tucker Carlson is, a lot of people have been trying to determine like what does he actually believe, which I think every day gets harder to pin down, on partially on purpose. But I think his bringing Nick Fuentes on the show was actually kind of an attempt to make himself a gatekeeper of like what is going to be this new developing. I don't know what they're going to eventually call themselves. There's definitely this post-MAGA, this move away from the MAGA Trump Republican Party. So
I think they're calling it America Only. It seems to be the new term, America Only. It's not just America First, but it's America Only.
Okay, yeah. So if the move is to this America Only perspective, then I think Tucker wants to make sure he is one of the gatekeepers. And so by platforming Nick, he allows himself to kind of take on that. I don't know, there's a lot of discussion here in Israel about who's actually funding Tucker Carlson's show.
Absolutely. And I was just going to, no, Jay.
I don't know who's setting his agenda for him, but I definitely do see that there is like the people he's platforming on his show since he went independent, there is definitely an agenda.
We should look at his guests.
Yeah, Jay, let's steer in a certain direction.
Yeah, we should discuss his guests because, and dear John pointed this out. So, of course, he went and did an interview with Putin in Russia, right? Mm-hmm. Russia, Ukraine is another subject, but
which platform Putin's own views about Russian Ukrainian history, which don't necessarily match up with what actually happened. But go ahead, Mark.
Absolutely. Who was that person that was on there that said they were a woman but looked extremely male to me?
That was the sister of the former White House press secretary, now ABC news person, George Stephanopoulos. Was his sister, who, by the way, is a nun, some Orthodox type of nun who trained in Russia.
Right. And then what about there was that other Palestinian group of something of the cross.
Christ at the Checkpoint. Yes. One of the founders of that is a guy named Munther Isaac. Who's a liberation theologian, pro-Palestinian, Marxist, whatever you want to call him. Claims to be Christian, but is a propagandist. I've met him, so I know him a little bit. And Steve, so we see this was, maybe to circle back with Steve on this. So we see this series of interviews that Tucker does. I mean, I think the first one that I think was really apparent was Munther Isaac from Bethlehem.
Yep.
And how he cast that. My friend Dumasani Washington did an article with somebody from Epic Times at Tablet back in April of 2024, a year and a half ago, and they titled the article "The Arsonist." Tucker Carlson burns down the bridges between Israel and evangelical Christians, and I think that was a very apt thing. Steve, do you have any comments on how Tucker's sort of platforming these people and the way he does it?
Well, it's just obvious that Tucker has an agenda that the only person he's ever interviewed. Look, it was Dinesh D'Souza that said that Tucker's methodology of interviews is called the ventriloquist methodology. In other words, he has people that come on that end up really just voicing his own opinion, what he wish he could say, but he won't say outright because then he'll lose all of his credibility, of being a journalist. So instead, he just has people as guests that he knows as he questions will give voice to his. Now, look, to his credit, he had Ted Cruz on, and what was shocking about the Ted Cruz was probably the only guest he ever had who was obviously not in agreement with him. What surprised me about the Ted Cruz interview is that Ted Cruz is a very intelligent person. Most people don't know that Ted Cruz was the debating champion of Princeton University. So this guy's no dummy. but he was not prepared for what Tucker threw at him that night.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
he got exposed, and it did, tremendous damage. Now, in the aftermath, I've seen Ted Cruz give phenomenal speeches, like at John Hagee's Christian Friends of Israel, celebrate Israel night. But obviously that doesn't have the audience that he could have had in the interview with Tucker Carlson. Now, why did Tucker have Ted Cruz? That's interesting. Tucker would not put somebody on there who he thought. I personally don't think Tucker would interview somebody who he'd be afraid that could really take him apart, or so that he actually thought he'd walk over Ted Cruz is interesting. What was his insight on Ted Cruz like I said, Ted Cruz is a Princeton University debating champion from the past. Why did Tucker think he would easily walk over him like he did is part of the story that I would love to hear. But right, look, none of these people have guessed who they disagree with. They're no longer in the seeking after the truth phase. They've found their truth, and now each person who they host is just there to echo that truth, repeat that truth. So that's all I can say about that. I don't think Tucker is seeking the truth anymore on this issue. He's found his intellectual and spiritual home, and now he's going to do everything he can to canvass on behalf of that, because he thinks the Christian Zionists are the biggest impediment, to his vision of America only. It's interesting, and I'm sure, John, you're aware of this. I think you saw this when Tucker said that his least favorite tribe of people on the planet are Christian Zionists, which means he hates them more than he does, Islamists or jihadists or, any of these other people. Because Tucker understands there's so few Jews in the world, let alone in America. The real numerous nemesis here is the Christian Zionists. There's tens of millions of them, and there's only maybe 5 or 6 million Jews, half of which aren't even, most of which aren't even conservative. They're not in the Republican Party, so they don't have the ability to shape, Republican policies. The Christian Zionists who he sees as the major force that needs to be discredited and deconstructed. And my only disappointment about the Christian Zionists in this issue is that until recently, none of them have really hit back. I also have noticed this about, and this is such a disappointment I've had in Turning Point USA. You have Candace Owens every single night going after Turning Point USA, insinuating that Charlie's wife had him killed, insinuating that the guys who took over the radio show or podcast did it, and they never come out and call her out by name. They all seem to be afraid of her. And then finally, this one woman, to her credit, this Allie Beth Stuckey, a few days ago, finally came out in a very gracious way, not aggressive way, responded to Candace Owens. But I'm like, for all the talk that there's tens of millions of Christian Zionists in the country, they haven't let out a whimper yet, let alone a roar. The people that are roaring are the Tucker Carlsons, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes. Each of these people has 5 million people. There is nobody in Christian Zionism that has, a platform of followers of 5 million. So the Christian Zionists, even if they claim, and I don't know if it's true, I've heard them say that they're the majority of the population, that they have the lion's share of the population over the Tucker types. It doesn't register on YouTube or, social media. The other side, the Tucker side, seems to have the monopoly on that, and even Allie Beth Stuckey, who I just mentioned, who was like the first to strike back. I don't think, she, compared to them, she has maybe 250,000 people on her YouTube channel. I'm not knocking her. She's got far more than I do, but I'm just saying, compared to them, 5 million for Tucker, 5 million for Candace, or 5.5 million actually for Candace. And 5.5.
Actually, it's 7.5 million. I just checked.
Wow. And
Tucker is 16.7 million on X.
All right, that's amazing. So, right, I was only looking at their YouTube subscriptions.
Oh, okay.
You're adding up the full panoply that these people have. Yeah. So there is no one, unfortunately, in Christian Zionist circles that can hit back at that way that they wanted to. Those people are the heavyweight champs. And the Christian Zionists currently only register on the, the Richter scale as lightweights. regardless of what percentage they are of the population at large. They don't have any sort of parity with these other people, in social media. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but yes.
Well, so the thing I think, and I think we addressed this, or this came up at the media summit that we were just at in Israel, Steve, the three of us, is how do you respond when it's constant, and Candace must have a staff that feeds her all of this stuff. Tucker has a staff that feeds him all of that stuff. And and then they do these long form. Tucker does these hour and a half long interviews. Like today, he did an hour and a half interview with Nikki Haley's son.
That's right.
To
I saw
kind of
that.
attack everything with Nikki Haley.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so how do you respond to that? So, we've been going for 40 minutes or so, or 50 minutes, and we have maybe 400 people watching on YouTube, on one of the YouTube channels. How do we respond to that? And to be honest, let me just sort of from personal experience, I was a trial lawyer. So at trial, you present your case, then the other side presents their case, and then the side that goes first gets to do rebuttal. And there's a very systematic process to it, but that's not the way social media operates. Yeah. Social media operates as to who can fill the space the most quickly.
That's right.
With all the garbage. And so you have this sewage being thrown out there constantly all the time. Right. And to be honest with you, media outlets that we maybe once trusted or thought were carrying some of the burden on that, like a Fox, or like, I'll give you the classic example we need to talk about, the Steve Bannon's War Room, which has millions of followers. And where are we at today on this? Where's Steve Bannon's? Steve, where do you think he is?
Well, I agree with you. He's sort of gravitating towards the Nick Fuentes types. Now, remember, and this is important, he too is a Catholic. And in fact, now again, I'm not saying mainstream Catholics are caught up in all this, but I'm just saying, if you look carefully at all these people at their studios, Candace has a very Catholic background to her studio. Bannon is very outspoken about he being a Catholic. In other words, let's say this, not all Catholics, of course, are anti-Semites by any means, but there is this pattern where I'm seeing that most of the Christian anti-Semitism is coming from Catholics. Again, I want to repeat that. It's very important. Not all Catholics are anti-Semitic. We have many Catholic friends. In fact, one of Israel's greatest proponents, this lady named Erin, is it Moran or Milan? The former Australian version of Sky News. Huge supporter of Israel. She's Catholic. I'm not saying that some of our biggest supporters are Catholics too. So again, I don't want anybody who's watching this who may be Catholic to say, well, man, this guy's going after the Catholics. I'm not. But at the same time, I can't help but notice that most of the Christian anti-Semites come from a Catholic point of view on all this. You wouldn't see this coming out of, a dispensationalist evangelical Christian background. So we can't underrate how important theology, is involved in all this. How it's playing its role in these people's biases. I agree with you, John. I don't think we can compete with these people ever in terms of our exposure to the larger world because we're not sensationalists. That's the point. These people, with the exception of Tucker, who inherited his audience from his Fox News position. In other words, he probably had the easiest time ever starting a podcast because he basically took an entire audience that he already had from a mainstream news organization and just converted it to a new audience. So excluding him, the others like Candace, Fuentes, these are people who get their clicks because of what you said. They're sensationalists. They go out of their way to push the boundaries, move the goalposts on what you can say. And people like us won't do that because that violates the very core of our morality. That's the point. We're not able to fight these people on equal footing. There's nothing that I can say or any of us could say that would be considered sexy, to 5 million people, or 16 million people. There's nothing that any of us are saying or teaching that has that allure. So you're right. I'm not sure any of us can ever compete with that. Because we'd have to sell our soul to a degree, to enter the stratosphere of viewership on YouTube and social media platforms. You have to be willing to sell your soul and become just like them, tabloidish, sensationalist. I mean, look, I know people, and I don't want to mention them by name, who are of our background, now look, we all do prophecy updates and stuff like that, but some of the most popular prophecy update channels on YouTube are the ones that are irresponsible with it, that are sensationalist about it, So sensationalism unfortunately sells. And I'm obviously not willing to compromise on my moral principles, neither are you guys. So I don't think we can compete with them. It would be like saying, how do I compete with the pornography industry? Like if how I compete? Right, I can't, because they're selling a product that I'm not willing to traffic in, because it will make me dirty too and discredit me too. So that's what's scary about it. We really can't equal them, or reach their level of viewers.
Steve, I want to congratulate you. Sorry, Jay. I want to congratulate you that within your sentences, you weren't saying every 5 seconds breaking news,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
another update and breaking news. And yes, I am deliberately saying that and being rather sarcastic, but what you've said, I think, is really, really important and profound, because it does come with that responsibility, and to encourage you. No, we can't compete with 5 million. Dear John, we did a show the other night. There's 10,000 people nearly that have accessed that. Hallelujah. If you do a show, Steve, it goes to 10,000. That's 20,000. If Jay, you do the same, that's 30,000. If I manage to do something like that, that's 40,000. We've reached 40,000 people. They can then go and have a conversation as well.
Yeah.
So to encourage you, keep going.
And I would say, another encouragement, going back to the Charlie Kirk thing, the day after Charlie Kirk was shot, my son, who I don't want to give too many personal details, he's only 16, but he goes to an international school in Jerusalem, and they have a lot of UN and other diplomat children there at the school. And so Steve, you've lived in Israel, what type of viewpoints many of those people have. And so, but he came home the day after, and he said, I need to be more outspoken about what is true and what is right.
Wow.
And he's stepped up. He led a youth Bible study at a Bible study that earlier this evening in Jerusalem, and he's inspired several of his friends, like, hey, look at what's happening. They tried to silence that voice, so we need to step up. And so I do think, it's not something we should be too worried about. And on one hand, I do think, Steve, you referred to this kind of Matthew 24, delusion. And I think we need to remember that the Bible does say that God sends the delusion, and it is a judgment on people. Like it's going to affect the people that were willing to be deluded.
Excellent word, Jamie. I agree with you 100% on that.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I stopped watching Tucker Carlson even before he took this current trajectory was that whole questioning style that he and Candace have. And I remember watching one time, and I was thinking, I've heard this type of question before. In Genesis 3, has God said? It's not a question that leads to greater knowledge. It's a question that leads to greater doubt.
Right.
And so I think part of our role as truth tellers, that's what the three of you guys, that's how I see you as truth tellers. Our role is to answer back with truth, and to point back to, you know, the questions that Jesus asked were questions that pointed towards greater faith, or the questions that the enemy asked point towards greater doubt. And I think that's our we're signposts. We're pointing in the direction of trust in God, you know, following the truth and the way. And we know Jesus said that the way is narrow and few that find it, but we want to be the signpost on the way, saying this is the way.
Jay, I'm not saying that he would do it. I'm not saying that it would be the right thing to do, but on the other hand, it would be an absolute delight to get your 16-year-old son having a discussion with us, because I feel like there is so much I could learn from his viewpoint, being a lot over to say, you know, to get his insight into why he said, I've got to speak up. You know, what were the conversations that were going on? I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but I'm really, really encouraged by that as well. And there's that whole thing of, discipleship, mentoring and encouraging.
Yeah.
Jay, that's something you said that's, I mean, boy, that was a great word that you just said. First of all, we have to accept the delusion maybe coming from God himself. I mean, we are that close to the end of the age, with all the ugliness, you know, that comes with that. I thought that was that's what makes it so scary, right? We look at the delusion and we're like, how can anybody fall for this? But it is unique delusion.
Yeah.
And what was that second thing that you said that was? Oh, I wanted to say that we also have to remember that God's always worked with a remnant, you know, and that remnant may be smaller than any of us want to believe. You know, you hear mixed. Some people say there'll be this incredible revival at the end, you know, where just hundreds of millions of people pour into the faith. Maybe that's true. But then maybe the remnant is much smaller than that, which is another reason why we'll never have such a popular appeal with, you know, such a large audience.
Yeah. And I also think that, John, the other 16 million people are lost in the YouTube video feed that wasn't the correct one. That's why they're not.
Oh, yeah, Candace might be talking, so maybe that's why the internet is going down. Steve, I mean, you've done a lot of work with people in the Calvary Chapel movement over the years. I think you've led a lot of tours from people like Chuck Smith all the way down through different people. Candace went after Calvary Chapel.
That's right. That's right.
How do you respond to that? I mean, and look, I know a lot of the Calvary Chapel guys. I speak at Calvary Chapels and that type of thing. And I haven't seen a big concerted effort to respond to it.
That's right.
The problem is that by not responding, the narrative never gets addressed.
That's
Candace has created the space. So, I mean, what should we do to respond to that?
So, unfortunately, since the passing of Pastor Chuck, you know, the movement split into various streams. So it's not like they're even capable today of speaking as a movement. But she did attack certain individuals, and most notably Jack Hibbs, you know, who she put indicted with all this. McCoy, you know, Mikey McCoy's dad, the pastor, Rob McCoy, right? So, you know, as individuals, have they responded to her? I'll tell you this. I know Jack Hibbs personally. I guided him. Not only did I guide him several times in Israel between the year 2000 and 2008, but I've been a guest in his house, and he even took me on a family vacation with him once. He's no weakling, Jack. Jack is a guy who's capable of punching back. I don't know if he has responded yet. If he has, it just hasn't made its way to me yet, his response. But he's not a shy guy, so it's very possible that Jack will decide at a time of his choosing to hit back, and I'll definitely be interested to see what he says.
Of course, he's also a pastor of a very large church, and I'm sure, knowing Jack pretty well myself, I think that his reaction will be, well, nobody around here is in my immediate circle they're going to believe any of this garbage that she's
Right.
putting out.
Right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think the only other Calvary Chapel figure I could think of doing that, or at least somebody that came out of the Calvary Chapel, is Mike Winger, and he posted a thing on X the other day saying
right.
that they're Tucker and Candace are heading for a cliff or something like that, but I haven't seen him. I mean,
well, if that's the case, then maybe our goal should be to assist their speeding towards the edge of that cliff.
I've got an idea for Jack Hibbs, Steve and John. Basically, as Candace is, Jack has most probably thought of this, as Candace is coming out with her comments, he could then reply to her comments and just splice himself in, and then make that video, make that podcast. I think that would be quite powerful. That will go quite viral. But suggest that to him.
And Steve,
Jack's an interesting character. He's definitely an alpha male, but he's got that like Southern California sitcom father smile.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But behind that smile is a guy who's, like I said, he's definitely not a weakling. So it's going to be interesting to see. I agree with John, that it's not like Jack's own crowd would care or be, persuaded against him. It's not like he feels probably embattled by her, but still, it'd be interesting. It'd be very interesting to see his response if he ever chose to do that, to call her out.
Because he could cut himself in with it, and we could then send it viral. We could help do that.
Yeah. So Steve, I want to circle back a little bit on this pre-Vatican II Catholicism. So I'm definitely aware that Candace Owens' husband, George Farmer, is a big pre-Vatican II guy, like is people like Mel Gibson.
That's right.
And other people. And it seems like, so maybe just explain a little bit more what they're pushing back against. What do they really, really dislike about Vatican II?
So there's a Latin term for the stream that many of these people belong to. It's the Latin is sede vacante, which sede means chair in Latin, vacante like the English word vacant. So they believe that since Vatican II in the 60s, the papal chair has been vacant, that each successive pope has been a sellout, and compromise with the world, compromise with the Jews. So they reject, it comes with this whole panoply of ideas, but the thing that seems to most animate them is this redefinition of the relationship with the Jews, because until Vatican II, the official Catholic theology vis-a-vis the Jews was it was called deicide. Basically, the Catholics taught until Vatican II that all Jews of all times are uniquely guilty of Jesus's death and therefore are uniquely cursed for all times. Not just the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the teachers of the law of Jesus's day, not just Caiaphas, but all Jews of all times. They like to use the verse that said, "May his blood be on our heads and on the heads of our children," as to validate that belief. There was a prayer, I believe, I may be wrong on this, there was a liturgical prayer in the old Latin liturgy that referred to the Jews as basically these perfidious Jews, so when Vatican II came, it did away with the deicide charge. It now claimed that the Jews were the elder brethren of the Catholics, that the Catholic faith, basically Romans 11, that the Jews are that stock of the olive tree that all Christians have since been grafted into. So they did away with deicide. I don't think in any modern day liturgical, mass or prayer in Catholic Church, you'll hear Jews referred to as the perfidious Jews as they were before the Vatican II. So it's that in particular that a lot of these people seem to be most animated by. Even if that's not the only issue that this movement of sede vacante believes in, or is concerned with, it seems to be the main one that gets these people riled up, is the way the Catholic Church redefined their relationship theologically with the Jews since the 1960s. And of course, Vatican II was issued in part to their credit. The Catholic Church did what's called in Hebrew a heshbon nefesh. Heshbon nefesh in Hebrew means an accounting of one's soul. You know, we're all supposed to do it as individuals in Yom Kippur. And evidently the Catholic Church following World War II realized that while Hitler may not have been a Catholic, you know, by any means, there was enough there of vilification of the Jews for 2,000 years. And by the way, the Catholics are not unique in this. Hitler probably quoted Martin Luther more than any Christian writer as to validate his views of the Jews, his policy vis-a-vis the Jews. But at least the Catholic Church took an accounting of their soul collectively and said, okay, what can we do to improve things so that we're not providing ammunition, you know, for the anti-Semites of the world, and it led them to Vatican II. So that's the context of Vatican II, and you mentioned Mel Gibson, of course. You know, I remember way back, even before the movie The Passion, you know, it was well known that his father belonged to this stream, and most people believe that he himself also did, but you know, wasn't as provable as the father because the father was a writer. You know, there was written proof of the father identifying with that, whereas the son, it was only, you know, insinuated. But then again, and I'm not harping on Mel Gibson because I don't know where his heart is today. But, you know, I remember within a couple of years of the making of The Passion, he was arrested for some, you know, offense where he was intoxicated and, you know, slandered the Jews and cursed out the Jews to the cop and all that. So he probably didn't have a wonderful disposition towards the Jews either. But that's the context of all this Vatican II and those people that reject it.
By the way, just somebody mentioned this in the comments. I've
Yes.
never understood this anti-Jewish canard that, well, we should hate them because the Jews killed Jesus, which if Jesus doesn't die, we're kind of in a
That's
bad
right.
spot.
Right.
I don't understand. It's not theologically correct by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. I think, John, if I can say real quick,
Sure.
part of it is something that the Gentile world's never forgiven us for, and evidently some of the Christian mainstream denominations of history have never forgiven us for, is the whole chosen people mantle that we have. In other words, I think a lot of that comes from because Christians are a kind of chosen people too. I mean, that's true. You could argue that God has two chosen peoples in a sense. You know, he's got the nation of Israel that are ethnically chosen for the Abrahamic covenant, you know, the covenant of nationhood, the covenant of the land of Israel. That's basically what the Abrahamic covenant is. And of course you have the body of new covenant believers, you know, that are a chosen people unto their own right, you know. But it seems like a lot of them developed this exclusionary policy. There can only be one chosen people, and how dare those Jews, you know, claim to be the chosen people still. We're the chosen people now. So I think it's also part of that prodigal son parable. I think you have among a lot of traditional Christians this, they see the way the Jewish people went wayward for the past 2,000 years spiritually. They resent that God's still keeping his covenants with that wayward people because it always had to do with God's faithfulness alone and not the faithfulness of us, the Jewish people. That's what they miss. And like the faithful son who was there for the last 2,000 years, preaching the gospel, doing all the mission work and all that stuff. How dare the father, you know, still have love for that wayward kid working in the pig slop, you know, far away, you know, in that foreign land. So I think that's where a lot of that bitterness comes from.
Yeah. So and the church has not handled the relationship with Jewish people very well. And currently, I mean, you know, when you start talking about things that are coming in Bible prophecy, like the temple, immediately, you know, there's all these people jumping in. Oh, those stupid Jews are building a temple, and you know, but you know, I don't know, Steve. Maybe we do this on another program. There's a few topics I'd like to discuss, like this restoration that we're in, this reconciliation process that we're in, at least that I see, and then address certain things like I was telling Mark, I had a conversation with a person the other day who had found my channel and wanted some help, but then I asked them what their channel was about, and the answer was, well, Revelation 2:9 and 3:9, which is the synagogue of Satan.
Right.
And it was pretty clear that I was dealing with someone who was way off theologically. So I think synagogue of Satan is
one of their favorites.
People love that. It's like their life verse.
Yes.
But I don't think they understand what it says.
That's right. That's right.
It's so they kind of latch onto that like
that's right.
The life, whatever that thing is they throw out when you're drowning. You latch onto that,
like
hold on to it.
Yeah.
So, Mark, Jay, do you have anything else you'd like to talk to Steve about? Folks, by the way, just so you know what you guys think, I'm linking in the show notes. I'll put Steve's YouTube channel and the recent videos he did on the Gnosticism and the Groypers, which I think are must. He goes into very good detail, and I must commend you.
Thank you
for being very articulate, organized, and it reminds me of a great legal brief that was that you put up on those.
Thank you so much.
Topics.
Coming from a lawyer, that's a high compliment. So I appreciate that.
Well, I can tell you, John, having been a classmate of Steve, he's an excellent student. So he does and it shows in his videos. He does his research very well.
Well, I appreciate it, Jay.
Mm-hmm.
Jay and I shared some of his. Jay and lost his
entire.
I know. A few minutes ago, I outed him by mistake. I was like, but I remember when you are a technical wizard. But I remember at some point you told me that you deleted by mistake your master's thesis. Is that correct?
No, I had it wasn't. It was a paper before, but yeah, I had thought I had backed it up to the cloud,
right? And
I was having a hard drive failure.
Oh man!
And
never trust the clouds.
Right.
Yeah, so I now make multiple copies. I have a thumb drive backed up on the cloud.
Well, I've really enjoyed this discussion, and I hope we get to do it again.
Yeah.
I think we should schedule again. Mark and Andrew, you got anything you'd like to ask Steve before we go?
No, Steve, thank you. And I must
thank you.
Watch those videos. The other thing I was going to say, when we're mentioning Jack Hibbs, when you're talking about people pushing back,
yes,
I'm wondering in a sense how, well, something to pray for that happens in a very natural way within people that want to push back within their personalities. Is it a concern if suddenly it was all orchestrated? Do you know what I mean? Because we want to just hear me out. We want to let God lead on that. Otherwise, we'd end up having a committee of 50 million people and no one would ever say anything.
Right.
There's so many creative ways, isn't there, that we could come back at people over time. There's also that other thing, which, as John said, that in the end, these people, they end up driving off the cliff. It's just sadly, someone like Carlson is so influential, and it's who he has the ability to reach, to interview. Yeah. But I suppose maybe Qatar and money is useful. Or did I say that? Yes, I did. I mean, that's the thing. But Steve, I'm very Anjay, very grateful for that, because I think you're right. How do we address it? We keep speaking the truth, even if they've got millions. We just keep going.
Yeah. So I have a question for Steve. I'm going to make a comment before. Mm-hmm. As I've watched Candace, of course, I can't help being a trial lawyer for a long time, thinking of things in those terms. And I constantly post stuff on Facebook and have to take it down because of the rather low information comments that seem to I seem to attract. And I don't have time to deal with it. Okay. And sometimes I delete comments, and folks, if I'm deleting it because I don't want you to be embarrassed because it just makes no sense. But I've come to the conclusion. So, like on the Charlie Kirk assassination, I've said this many times. I did a talk on postmodernism 25 years ago in California and how it was going to affect the church, and I think that turned out to be pretty accurate assessment. But it also it's infecting trial work, trial practice, where everybody now runs on their emotions. We used to get trial lawyer seminars about how to be a more effective lawyer in presenting evidence. And then back in the late 90s, it started to change where you were trained to appeal to people's emotions. Mm-hmm. And I could say now that no one will, my current assessment of the land on the Charlie Kirk assassination, no one will ever be convicted of that, ever. Mm-hmm. You cannot trust a jury. I mean, all these people that comment, can you imagine having them on your jury?
Right.
Trying to convince them of evidence. So, Steve, this is totally unrelated to our conversation.
Okay.
Everybody, please like, share, subscribe, follow Steve, follow Mark, follow Jay, Jace with All Israel News. And I have a question for you. I just led my first tour to Israel in October. You call yourself Steve the tour guide, so I think you probably have done this before.
Yes.
And on my tour, I tried to make it different. I tried to focus on the biblical heartland, Judea and Samaria, because I think most tours avoid that. But if I'm setting up a tour for next year, mm-hmm. Do you have one or two just like must go places?
You're going to be disappointed. Yeah, you're going to be disappointed with my answer. I mean, no, but are you referring to particularly like the Judea and Samaria stuff that most people don't do?
I mean, like if so, let's say somebody's got a 2-day tour. Yes. Where are you going to take them?
A 2-day tour? They'd have to choose. They'd have to choose between.
They're coming in on a cruise, okay?
Sure. So they have to choose first of all between Jerusalem and the north, because those are the two main geographical districts that the tour is, let's say a 10-day tour, or an 8 or 9-day tour, split their time between. So now they have no choice but to decide on one of the others, either Jerusalem or the sites around the Sea of Galilee, like Capernaum, and I love Magdala. So I'll tell you, one of my favorite Christian sites. I used to love Capernaum, but the newer site of Magdala I found took over I just love it. And I feel, and to their credit, now people will know I'm not some sort of enemy to the Catholics, based on what I was saying earlier about these particular Catholics we're referring to. The Catholic Church's caretaking in Megiddo, of Magdala, has been unbelievable, just outstanding. The people, they're very spiritual, these people, the ones that handle that particular site, very gracious to believers, evangelical believers. You could even say they're sort of ecumenical. They employ even people that are, I one time had somebody employed at that site that was an atheist, so it's not common among their other sites. So I love Magdala. So let's say this, of Galilee versus Jerusalem. Now I'm forced, on a 2-day tour, I'll always choose the Galilee because I don't love Jerusalem. Most tour guides don't like to work in Jerusalem. You, the tourists, like it. We, the tour guides, don't like Jerusalem because it's a very stressful area to work in. There's almost no parking for tour buses. Most of the sites are on the Palestinian side of the city, which comes with its own, with there's pickpocketers, there's beggars everywhere. There's constant, sometimes outright hostility. To us, the guides, or to the tour group in general, especially if the tour doesn't agree to buy their souvenirs on the top of the Mount of Olives, So when you go to the Galilee, there's none of that. The Galilee is just smooth sailing. It's as gentle as the waters of the Sea of Galilee. So I just love the rural. It's shocking that in the year 2025, the Galilee is still largely undeveloped. It's not that different from Jesus's day. People on the tour bus always say to me, how is it that this place isn't just fully developed around the full circumference? How is it that there's not major cities and urban development around the circumference of the Sea of Galilee? And they're right. There's so little development to it. So I love the Galilee. I love the Sea of Galilee. I love the Golan Heights. I love a site called Mount Bental that's on the border with Syria. It's a great place to take people to talk about, the whole thing with Syria and its civil war and the leader of Syria. I remember I had Mike Huckabee on a tour. I guide him every year. I have a tour. Believe it or not, Mike Huckabee, although he's the ambassador, is still leading tours. I don't know how this is possible, but I'm scheduled to guide a tour in February in which Mike Huckabee is still listed as the tour leader. And I remember we took a group to the border with Syria on the Golan Heights one day. He always comes in February when it's miserably snowy on the Golan Heights and cold. And he had one of the other tour guides who was a veteran of a war of Israel, the war between Israel and Lebanon back in 1982. He always asked that tour guide to give the teaching there on the border with Syria. And I remember while he's giving the teaching, we heard mortars, Syrian ISIS mortars exploding right within, I would say, a quarter mile from our position on the border. Just explosion after explosion while the tour guide is teaching. And Mike Huckabee says to the tour guide, whose name was David, he's like, David, shh. He's like, David, don't talk. Just let people listen. Let there be silence. So we had silence for about 2 minutes, and you could hear the sound of machine gun fire, the sound of mortars and grenades. And then at the end of the 2 minutes, Mike Huckabee says something to this effect. He says, when you guys go home to the West Coast and people ask you, why don't those stingy Jews give the land up for peace, just tell them things look a lot different on the border with Syria than they do far away, in Southern California. And I just thought that was more powerful than anything that I as a guide could say, or this guy David as a guide could say. In other words, that's a powerful site, a site that speaks volumes without anybody speaking at all. So I love the border with Syria as a site. So that's my take. The Galilee over Jerusalem, if I have to whittle it down to 2 days. And within those 2 days, I would say a full day around the Sea of Galilee, but mostly on the western shore, Magdala, Capernaum, a place called Peter's Primacy that I love to take tourists to, where John chapter 21 took place. Mount Beatitudes, obviously. And then on the second of those 2 days, the Golan Heights, but including the Old Testament site of Tel Dan and the New Testament site, Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus says, I think it's in Matthew 16, who do they say I am? Those are two great days. And those are my favorite part of each tour.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would vote for, if I'm doing, I would vote for Hebron, as much as you can get to. Some of it's not accessible really.
That's
to
right.
Tours.
That's right.
I've been to those places though, and you kind of get an understanding for the division in Israel, and then City of David.
I love the City of David. Yeah.
I'll just say that I've shared this a number of times, and everybody's going to say, John, you talk about this all the time. So I'm going to talk about it again. We went to the Gaza envelope, and we were there before the hostage deal was done. We went to Kfar Aza.
Yes.
There were still twin brothers, I believe, who were still being held hostage, since been released. But we got back to Jerusalem. You'll love this. So we go to the hotel, and they say, we're going to walk over to the City of David. And so, I put in Google Maps on my app, directions to the City of David. We were staying at a Dan Panorama Hotel. Great food, by the way, phenomenal food, and no low flow shower heads. This is it's like heaven.
Right.
And I'm taking a wrench with me the next time to maybe swap out a shower head.
Right.
Because it's unbelievable. But anyway, so all the Google Maps directions for walking say mostly flat. There's no mostly flat in.
That's right.
From the Dan Panorama, I mean, it's up Mount Zion, down Mount Zion, then down and up and down. And but we went to a light show about the life of Nehemiah, projected on the wall of Nehemiah.
It's amazing.
At the city of David. While they're talking about the hostages, and there's a verse in Isaiah or Nehemiah 8:17 that said that when they returned from captivity, and we were there during Sukkot,
Right.
the Feast of Booths, that they built booths, which they had not done since the time of Joshua. And there was exceedingly great joy in the city. And it was like, it just sort of, it was like the amplified version of the
Right.
Bible living out right in front of you. So
I think
anyway,
the city of David is the premier archaeological site in the country. There's no doubt about it. Most of the cutting edge finds in Israel today are in the city of David. It's an amazing story. When I went to Israel in June because I owed the Ministry of Tourism. Each year we have to do 2 field trips, of extended education to renew our licenses. So I owed them already for 2 or 3 years because I missed out on the 2 years of the Hamas, October 7 war. And so I went to do 6 of these, and one of them was the city of David. But wait to hear this. I was so desperate to do it because I knew they had found so many things that I signed up. The only one available was in Russian, a language that I don't know. So I joined a full day excursion to the city of David for a language that I'm not even familiar with, just because I knew I had to see these new, and I figured anything new that I see, I'll be able to Google it in Hebrew or in English to, probably biblical archaeology. What's the name of that magazine? Bar.
Yeah.
Biblical Archaeology Review probably has articles about it. But so yeah, the city of David I was really impressed with, especially what they just opened, known as the Pilgrim's Highway. That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
There was a coin they found there on the floor of the road that's now encased in glass. It's supposed to be invoking Pontius Pilate. So I just thought this was incredible stuff. And I was like, man, my tourists, I can't wait till they see that, when the tourism industry cranks up again. So,
yeah, we were able to get over there with, I don't know if I should say his name. I'll say it, Elie Shakron.
Yeah, sure.
Who uncovered temples, what they now call Temple Zero.
That's right.
The Temple of Melchizedek. So it was, and then the media summit a few years ago, they took us down there, and it's unbelievable. I mean,
unbelievable.
it's and when you talk to the people there, their goal is to have Jews and Christians walking up that road singing the Psalms of Ascent.
Yep.
So I sort of call it, well, that sounds like millennium practice to me. So this is the way I think.
Modern day, I guess what's so tragic about the whole modern day Israel thing, and this is the best way to even close off this whole discussion, modern day Israel is the greatest miracle of the last 2,000 years. It's the most obvious testimony of God's intervention in world affairs, his preservation of the Jewish people for the last 2,000 years, the rebirth of the country, and it's surviving overwhelming odds against it, and this last, before we went on air, I was telling you about my time during the 12-day war and how special that was to be there during the war with Iran, because it was so obvious that God was involved in all this. Yeah. I always felt God's covering and protection there. So it's just like God is trying to shout from the rooftops to these newer Gnostic types, I'm still that God, Yahweh. That's what this whole Israel thing is all about. It's his credentials he's presenting his credentials and his business card again through modern day Israel, saying, look, I'm still Yahweh, the God of all that parts of the Bible you people dismiss. He said, I can't be so easily dismissed because hundreds of passages are being enacted in our very day, or realized in our very day, and how there's a blindness on a large swath of Christianity to not only see this, but to be hostile to it. To me, is just it defies defies all sense.
I'm pretty sure I said in my update on October 8th, 2023, I could already see it rising.
Yeah,
the Jew hatred.
Yeah.
And explaining it away. And I said then that the need to be careful not to use clever theology to mask your Jew hatred, and that the issue of Israel and the Jewish people would be the most divisive issue in the evangelical church until Jesus returns. And I think that's
right.
Yeah.
bearing out. Not that I'm a prophet or anything like that. Anyway,
I think you're right.
This is the longest goodbye in the history of YouTube.
Yes.
So Steve, Jay, and Mark, thank you so much. We will do this again. And next time I want to be sure we talk about the reform theology aspect of this that we touched on a little bit, but I think my feed is full of that garbage too, and I'm tired of it. So everybody, like, share, subscribe.
Awesome.
Contact things in the show description. Please do that. Thank you for doing it, guys. I'm going to end the stream. Everybody, thank you. God bless. We'll see you the next time. I have a whole host of people that Mark and I met in Israel that we're going to be trying to interview over the next.
Awesome.
Well, if I could do them all in a week, I would do it, but we'll spread them out. But in the stream, I'll say goodbye. Everybody, thanks for watching.
All right.